So I want to say hello to everyone. For those of you who this is your first keynote, this is the second day of our Design Educators Typography Intensive. I'm Gloria Kondrup, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography. And our mantra is effective teaching should be shared, not a secret. And the DETI continues the legacy of Professor Leah Hoffmitz Milken, who for over 3 decades left her mark on students and future generations of thinking designers. Right, Mike? I want to say that this was made possible by generous sponsorship from Google and support from Art Center College of Design and the Lowell Milken Family Foundation. Now I get to introduce this morning's keynote speaker. From the wilds of Austin, Texas now, Mike Abbink. And Mike is currently the Executive Creative Director of the Brand Experience and Design team within IBM Studios. That's a long title, Mike. Previously, Mike was a Creative Director at the Museum of Modern Art, Wolff Olins, and also co-founder of Method. I didn't know you were Design Director of Apple Computer, and you, of course, were a graphic designer at Meta Design. Most of all, Mike has a passion for type design. Your typefaces, Kievet, Milo, Inspira, Brando, and of course, IBM Plex. And he earned a BFA in Fine Art and a BFA in Graphic Design. And I will say Mike Abbink was my former student and also a former student of Leah Hoffmitz Milken, where you did your first digital typeface design here at Art Center. So without any ado, I'd like to introduce Mike Abbink. Thank you, Mike.
Wow, thanks for the intro. And thank you all for joining, and especially from wherever you are. Hopefully it's from I could say it's from all over the world, which would be great. So let me share screen. All right, so if everything's looking good, I'm going to carry on. So, this is day 2 of branding and technology. And so everything I'm going to kind of share with you today is in that context, even though I may not specify it. It's about branding and technology. And most of all, it's going to really be about typography and the utter importance of that discipline and that craft. And speaking of craft, a lot of what I'm going to talk about today and share with you are my observations in terms of the details of typography, the implementation of typography, the thinking behind typography, and then the application of it across all the different channels that we have available and new ones that are, popping up. In a nutshell, type is all pervasive. From CUNY forms, hieroglyphics, to printing presses, to photo typesetting, to the laser printer. All of these typographic platforms have been there for us to deliver type, and those platforms keep continuing to evolve, right? So it's how we get the type out there, and it's everywhere, right? In everything. In our entertainment, every night my wife and I struggle greatly to find and choose a film because we're, moving across HBO, Showtime, Apple TV, there's Hulu, what else? PBS that we kind of explore entertainment in, and everyone has a different UI. They're always showing the posters or the images of the movies, which, by the way, have tons and tons of type in them, as you can see here. So my whole world, just during this, the selection of a program, is a bombardment of typography, but all good and bad, right? Confusing and clear. We're seeing more and more typography in our driving experiences, right? We're all driving vehicles, and across just transportation in general, more and more type, more and more, again, platforms or channels to deliver typography. And you can see that it's becoming ever present, right? As I said, it's all pervasive. Even in our retail shopping experiences, more and more and more, we're seeing super experiential kind of environments pop up. Of course, type plays a role in any experience you would create as a retailer, right? You have to communicate. You do that through type. And you guys know this. You've experienced it yourselves. I'm not really here to say anything new. I'm just wanting to kind of paint a picture real quick. You know, shopping online, all the apps that we have, ordering our food, the music we listen to, the packaging we buy in the supermarket, which is loaded with thousands and thousands of packages, right? All driven by typography. We know our favorite beer. I love this beer just because of the logotype. I would drink it even if it was a horrible beer. Even our ridiculous exercise machines are really becoming type centric, right? With little interfaces to deal with so you can exercise. You know, and even some of the most important things for us, when we as people demand change in the world, right? Demand respect, demand change, demand to be heard, we ultimately end up using type as our tool to do such. As we saw with Black Lives Matter, I found this really amazing. And type is everything. Everything is type. It leads me to believe that type is taken for granted in our world at large, right? Not just, you know, not for designers in particular. We appreciate type. But if we consider that the rest of the world takes type for granted, maybe doesn't see it or appreciate it as much as they should. And by the way, they should, and I'll get to that. What can we do about it? What do we do to change that perception, change that taken for granted kind of acceptance, you know, in the general public? You know, type is everywhere and everything, as I said, and, you know, in recent weeks, we saw like this document becomes very important, right? You can see that law, our whole country is kind of based upon the words set forth in this document. And it's argued against all the time. It's huge. And we don't think about it in terms of typography, right? We think about this thing in terms of its content, and that's where we focus. Oh, the content of this thing does X, Y, and Z. But really, that thing that's so important is a piece of typography. You know, the other thing that I feel we take for granted as a society is, you know, more type around us on a day-to-day basis where we drive around, and we need this signage, right? But who's really thinking about this beyond a few, you know, dedicated designers? But think about how important it is. So it leads me to think, God, wouldn't it be great if the type world had an awesome PR agency to develop a PR campaign and some advertising and accomplish what Got Milk did for milk, right? Like, this has become iconic. You know, I still see it today. It's like a 25-year-old campaign or maybe even older. And now they say, you know, got fashion, got whatever, you fill in the blank for milk, but it's an iconic kind of approach because it was so successful. So wouldn't it be awesome if we, you know, it was like Got Type campaign out there to really push typography on the minds, hearts and minds of all the people in the world, let them start focusing on typography a lot more. It could change things for us. But before I dive deeper in some of that stuff, you know, like I'm going to unpack some of that for a little bit, but I wanted to also just take you closer into my world at Big Blue, IBM, so you can see why typography is so vital for me, and that I'm looking at it literally every day, hour by hour, on occasion, minute by minute. And here's why. You know, like this is just a snapshot of our components for our design system, right? To build our software And we've extended this into the website experience too. So we have one digital design system that works for both software, which is very different than, say, our marketing website experiences, right? So, but as you can see, this is just a handful of, I don't know, there's 20 or 30 components here. There's probably another 20 or 30 missing. And then they constantly get created and added to when teams need certain interactions. But you can see here, it's all typography, right? And some boxes and containers, but it's typography, type driven, and it is dependent on a user to interact with it as much as the user is dependent on this little component to deliver functionality and information and action and behavior to me as a user. And of course, those components then come together and they make layouts and other patterns that we use in our experiences, right? And some of them are, you know, easy, and some get very complex. And this is just a quick snapshot also of a range of typical things in software, dashboards. And you can see they are little pieces of typographic gems and complexity. They're information design. They have data visualizations in them, and it's all delivered through typography and some visual forms for data viz. And not only is that in and of itself typography, the way we have to package it to our developers to build and code, we have to take every one of those components and spec them out and provide guidance to them to build, and then provide guidance to others to build in the form of documentation, right? So those things are, again, pieces of typography delivered to explain and be clear about what you do and what you don't do and what the expectations are, right? So again, it's a little piece of information design. And so designers have to execute typography very well here. You know, data viz. We do a lot of data viz and we spec it all out and design it. And again, you can see why I rely on typography, and I rely my team to be not just knowledgeable, but deeply knowledgeable in typography. Dashboard, some software. You know, and of course, we've captured a lot of our typographic details and the entire design language into a website. And my team has designed every bit of that. We not really work with an agency. They supported us, but primarily my little internal design team has been building the design language with some support and building the website experience. Our .com team is primarily doing that as well. Certainly building the foundational parts and pieces. So here's kind of .com where that's going. It's all pretty new. But again, typography. Our events, typography, and they do a lot of, you know, printed and static experiences as well as digital experiences, but like little kiosks, touchscreen kiosks. But again, all typography. And the brand, you know, the IBM brand is constantly dependent upon typography. We're very verbose business. We love to talk and explain our technologies, our points of views. And we have to explain the benefits and the value of a lot of these technologies. So it's constant information. And we try to present that in a way that, you know, not only can impact a user in their understanding, but begin to maybe provide them with enough knowledge to create and build visions, right? For them to use that technology and make amazing things in the world, right? We're not always the makers, we're the supporters of people that do make things. So like, how do we also inspire with our typography and imagery? Here's the social tile that was recently done for New Year's that I loved. You know, I didn't see this, social team did this, and they used our typeface Plex. And again, you know, so social media is a big platform for typography. And we've noticed that the most successful social tiles are things that animate, of course. And secondly, the ones that are doing really well are the ones that have typographic expression and clarity and kind of, animation to them that deliver fun things through some simple words that animate. Those seem to do very well because, again, they deliver probably some clear meaning and they do that in a delightful way. And of course, there's the classic need to do the simple stationery kind of stuff, right? All of our printed communications and annual reports and stationery. Again, you're seeing a world of typography that's very important to any brand. And that back to that social tile, the social tile or social teams are now, doubling and tripling in size. Every part of a business has to have a little team, and they're made up of, video folks. They create their own content. They have video teams, filmographers, editors, copy editors, writers, graphic designers, and they have, animators. 6-7 years ago, there was few of those. Now it's a must-have. And again, basically they're serving a typographic delivery vehicle within the social media channels. So as you can see, typography is at our foundation, not just IBM, everyone, but particularly we have a love for it. We use it to express, to inform and create and drive experiences. And before we created this design language, one of the first things we did was to create Plex, as you heard Gloria mention. And we needed to start with the type itself before we built the whole language around it that helps deliver that type as well. So let me play this little animation for you.
Our typeface, IBM Plex, is designed to capture IBM's brand spirit and history. IBM has always served as a medium between mankind and machine, between the natural and the engineered, the emotional and rational, helping humanity and technology move forward together. IBM Plex brings these relationships to life through letter forms, consisting of 4 subfamilies, 8 weights, and 2 styles. Plex can work well in any typographic environment or situation. The sans condensed, mono, and serif faces have excellent legibility in print and on screen. And while Plex's designs work well independently, they're even better together. Taking cues from the Selectric typewriter, the monospaced version of IBM Plex is perfect for use in coding by developers and to demonstrate code snippets in our communications or specifications. Open source and international, Plex currently supports over 100 languages with more yet to come, and with extended Latin and non-Latin versions can adapt to any typographic need. Just as important as our name and our logo, Plex is global, versatile, and distinctly IBM.
Yeah, so as you can see, even in that animation, we try to really show how robust typeface is and how robustly it needs to behave and perform across all of the channels that a brand has to deliver experiences in. So with that said, I think what I've discovered over the last almost 6 years at IBM is that I need to constantly, preach, teach, and remind people that they need to know thy craft, of design. And not everyone's always a, well-trained graphic designer. Not everyone may have had the best typographic education, but yet here they are designing things, they're literally laying things out as though they are a skilled graphic designer, and many of them are not. So how do we deal with that? Because I'm faced with that a lot on a day-to-day basis. So, it leads me to think that, that the design education is an ever continuing thing, and that businesses have to take on this notion of continued education and design, as much as it is, you know, the schools to kind of build the initial foundation to continue to build on. You know, silly as this sounds, and looks like, I am faced with making these corrections in presentations that are like final presentations to the executive creative director. They're supposed to be showing me some final thing that's about to go live, and I see, you know, straight quotes or dumb quotes in, you know, a final that I have to, you know, of course, bitch about. It's not really professional in most cases, if not all cases, right? So I'm constantly finding these little details that seem so dumb to me that I have to be the guy to constantly point this out. You know, people don't know how to use the right hyphens versus end dashes. No one knows the rules behind that, right? There's baseline grids that I've noticed that no one is using that I have to, you know, remind people, and some people don't even know what they are, yet they're doing layouts or making a little booklet. And it's a UX designer doing it, you know, and there they are stuck doing something that they necessarily don't have the skills to do. So I'm always like, what, how did this happen? You know, I see this a lot coming from trained, schooled graphic designers, huge long lines and little websites or applications or pieces of software. Again, I have to say, why is that type going across the entire width? Why don't you make it shorter? And then they're, oh yeah, we can do that. So really, the problem that I'm faced with, and I think it's everywhere, is that we've got a lot of UX and UI designers out there that ultimately end up basically being graphic designers. They're designing UIs. They're the ones laying stuff out, whole sequences and journeys across software or web, you know, series of web pages. And they may not have visual designers in some places you work. It's an engineer or developer and a UX person. They don't have budget for a visual designer. And so they're making layouts, right? And those things make it out to the glass. We're looking at them, and it has effects on the product and our discipline. So what do we do there? You know, how do we affect that somehow? I'm always thinking about this. And obviously this is a no-brainer, right? You would this is like, of course, the more you know about typography, the more effective your typography making will be. So if you're making typography, you need to get better at it, period, whether you're in school or have left school. So how do we do that? And so practice makes perfect comes to my mind too. So it begins in school, but I think it has to continue. But how can we start with the educator to help somehow build a mental model that, you know, hey, once you leave school, well, first get the education where it needs to be, the programming, but then create a mental model so as these students leave and go out into the practicing world, that they continue, and that they have to have the dedicated, you know, their self kind of commitment and self-dedication to continue to learn the craft. Because everyone across many design disciplines is now executing typography or close to it, or making decisions about typography. Which leads me to believe that with the zillions of typefaces and fonts that we have now, the demand on a designer is even greater to know more about typography as well. Because what do you do with all of these zillions of fonts, right? How do I best use them? How do I you know, begin to apply them in the best possible way? Well, again, the more you know about typography, the better you will execute typography. So we've all seen my fonts, right? Again, it's like the Netflix problem I showed you with you know, demand TV. There's trillions of fonts. You know, they're all in my face. It makes it very difficult to surf them and find them and think about them, because there's just so many at once, right? And I can do this all day long. I could show you home pages of font foundries and font designers all day long. Commercial Type, one of my favorite. Typotech, you know, Optimo, Line 2, Letters from Sweden, Feliciano Type, A2 Type, Bold Monday, which Brando Arabic there is one of my typefaces. Arabic was done by some other designers. Muir McNeil, Font Shop, there's Kievet Serif, pretty recent release that I worked on with Paul van der Laan. But as you can see, there's a super abundance, right? There's more than we could probably ever use. And so the question is now that, and by the way, some of the fonts out there are terrible, but some are amazing and beautiful and so well crafted. And there's a lot more of that happening because it's easy to become a type designer and focus there and learn such a specific thing. All right, so what is the ramification of that on designers who implement with those typefaces, right? Or create experiences or designs with with those typefaces. They're not type designers themselves, but they have to use them and apply them to stuff. So what do we do with all of those fonts, and are we doing a good job teaching all the designers how to discern quality and see the historical kind of arc in them or influences in them to be able to identify those histories or movements of type, or identify the typefaces themselves, or their, like a Garamond. There's tons of different Garamonds or Bodonis. Can they begin to identify which ones those are and which foundries? Like there's a lot, right? And the more you know, the better. There's so many cultural vernaculars that have been influenced type. You should know those things, right, to help you choose them and know how to apply them. And then, what kind of frameworks can one build to help, again, make decisions around typefaces? Like what is the purpose of this typeface? What am I doing with the typeface? What's the story, the narrative? How does this type fit into that? And how do I talk about that? So these are things that I constantly see missing and in designers, and the inability to do any of that. And yeah, I'd say, yeah, I don't have the answer to it all, but it's definitely I think a sore spot with me because I see it all the time, and it's been years and years. It's not new. I've been seeing this for a decade. And I think point of view, I certainly left school with a strong point of view, probably too strong. It probably harmed my growth potentially. But I think having one's super valid and super important. And I think by the time you leave school, students should have one, and they should have a point of view on typography that they've formed very strongly. And that doesn't mean, I'm not saying they have to be experts, but what is their point of view about typography? What do they feel its mission or purpose is, or how are they going to use it and apply it in their projects? So I think typography has a lot of different ways to be kind of taken in and turned into a point of view. The other thing I'm seeing, obviously, and you've seen it in some of the things I've already shown, but make it move, like that's now coming at us. There's no way around it. And typography pretty much moves all the time. And so I think you got to have that point of view. You got to have understanding. And then now you're adding like motion kind of principles and logics into that type and typography. So make it move is going to be a big deal. And you'll learn more about this from David Crossland later today. He's going to talk more specifically on variable fonts, but they're here, they're coming. I mean, they've been around, but more and more we're going to, see that like other platforms support variable fonts more and more, so they can be kind of utilized and applied in any medium or channel or platform. So that's coming at us. And I think, again, we've got to be able to, I think, provide the right foundation for someone to use that in the better way, because otherwise we'll be stuck in this, where mediocrity is the new normal, which we can't have. The other thing I'm seeing a lot more of and a need for just to continue to make progress in typography for branding is to program it, right? Meaning, the form of the type is dictated by data, dictated by some other form of manipulators, or constraints, and so that the type is programmed to basically become an image, or to move or behave, and have a life in and of itself. And so, more and more, we see identities taking form from that, right? The fact that now this type is living and breathing in a way and taking on different forms. And obviously you see that, you're like, oh my God, that can be let me make my logo from that, or let me make all of the imagery or the whole messaging that I need to do. I'm going to deliver it using this typeface that's changing and morphing as data changes, or whatever it is. So there's great potential here for brands, because it can actually make the brand expression and turn it into something, and then make it useful and functional at the same time. And not only does the type kind of get to be programmed, but like you see the upper left, even the kind of iconography that's also potentially used can take on the same programmatic qualities. We're seeing type start to interact with us, with the camera, and, we can make fun interactive experiences and deliver, again, a brand's point of view or a brand experience. And if it's the right idea, the right concept, again, it's creating this relationship between people and typography in a different way, a way that we haven't been able to do, right, until recently. And so where else can we take this? I don't know a lot about AR or augmented reality with typography, but I've seen some people exploring it, beginning to, and I think it's another thing we need to think about, because it's on the horizon. Here's a student that is developing a typeface specifically for augmented reality environments. It's a little test. The type itself and its performance. And you can see some design details have been made there, these little tapering effects at the joints. And I think that has a lot to do with the poor screen resolution in some of these scenarios. As you can see, that would help keep the type a little crisper. And then, there's other experiments I keep seeing. So a lot of potential here. I'm not sure what and where yet, but I think, that's on the designer, I think, to start really thinking about how do you use this? How do you make experiences that are meaningful and matter for that brand and help communicate things? So anyway, in looking at this, I really feel like this is coming at us real fast. And I think, certainly in advertising and a lot of brand communications, there's a great place for augmented reality, even some functional stuff. So anyway, coming at us, need to think about that. And I mentioned some social media earlier, like the fact that these teams are being built to support constant messaging, right? Constant delivery of content. Again, they have teams with designers and video folks, animators, and I'm seeing a real weakness there in terms of typography skills. Like they're designing a bunch of stuff, messaging, and it's all type again, and yet the person's not really well educated in typography. They just know some tools, and then they just make stuff. And so I think designing specifically around the social media kind of platforms and trying to deliver type there, because it's trickier. There's certain requirements and constraints there as well. So are we focusing enough on that and emphasizing this medium enough when we teach typography? And so in a world full of noise, right, which we know is here, we live among it. How do we signal in that noisy world? And, classic kind of teaching and design is, hey, you got to have an idea. It's got to be authentic. You got to be, constantly storytelling or building narratives. They've got to be meaningful, and they've got to be well crafted. Like this here has been around for as long as I can remember in design school, yet no one seems to be practicing this, like, or it's weak. This is not the norm when it comes to what I see being practiced and delivered in a professional environments for both design agencies. It's better there, obviously, but if you take design agencies out of the mix for a second, because those get usually the cream of our crop design folks, right? The talent seems to gravitate in that direction. But what about the businesses that are hiring designers, the Googles, the IBMs, and all these other places, mostly tech, that have in-house teams? Those folks also, like, they're executing this, and that's where I'm seeing a bit of the weaknesses show up, right? The cracks of kind of how design starts to manifest is a little weaker in those environments, kind of business entities. And there's an interesting idea that I keep hearing about, this notion of blanding, brandings, brand identities that have been coined as being bland, right? And I think there's a lot to be said around that, because I feel like the influence is strong because it's coming from these big brands who have earned the right or earned their place in time to, I wouldn't say bland, but they've grown up, right? They have huge products that deliver experiences to millions of people, and they're the top brands, and we use them every day. And their products are their brands, right? The experience of that digital product or set of products is how we experience them. And so the simplicity there can be reflected in their logotype, right? One could argue. But the side effect of this, I think, is, well, one, I would say, could these brands have done a better job to express themselves or their beliefs or some ideas a little bit more clearly in this, other than we're simple and we're modern, or less is more concept? Because anyone could kind of tack that on. But what about their history or what they believe in and what they stand for? Is there any ideas there that could have been injected into these? I don't know, maybe not. But what I will say is that these brands have major influence on other brands that are starting out. They want to compete with these guys, and they want to become these guys. And so they set out and they just emulate something like this from the start. They don't have the history in between like these guys have. From the, look, the first wave of these logos, especially Google, is terrible, right? So they have an arc that they've been on, and that matters. If you don't have that arc, but then you create something like this, like, make sure that it's driven by an idea. It needs to be. We're also seeing this in our world a little bit more, like the kind of excessive expression. Right? Burger King just left what you see on the left side behind, and they went back to their 1965 and 1970 version. They've kind of bounced back and forth to it a couple times. So now that they've gone back here again and landed here, which is super expressive and historical and connecting connective tissue back to what made them great in the first place. And so here's a video. One of my co-workers, Lisa Smith from JKR, did this, and Miles Newland is a great type designer, and he worked on the type, the logo type, and then they made a variable font. And you can see that all the things I've been talking about for a brand, this is set up for that, right? Motion, expression, delivery of type, using type as a means to deliver the entire brand and any of their experiences. So you can see type is critical for Burger King right now, and in a great fun way, yeah, type. And what's interesting with this and with variable fonts, you can see when it's moving or animating, or being used in a kind of a digital experience where you might see the kind of intent and the purpose of a variable font, that all makes sense there. But what's cool here is that they're pulling the kind of the aesthetic of that, or the motion and movements from motion, and they're pulling that into static expressions, right? So here you're seeing what the variable font can do, and if you kind of slice it up and see it frame by frame, and they're using it to communicate words and show off that it is variable in print, in static form. So I find that really interesting. So that the kind of the technological advancements are going, reversing and aiming back into our old technology, and kind of inspiring the way typography works there. But, as always, we do have expressive logo types everywhere, and businesses do try to capture expression in their logo types as well. So that exists as well. There's everything out there now, right? And that's my point that I'm trying to make, is given that the aperture is so huge, with typography being so vital to everything, it's more important now than ever that we understand typography so that we can target it and aim it in the best possible ways within these environments, these brands, these channels, and these experiences. And speaking of like mediocrity, or knowing enough about type to make the right decisions, this early version of Kickstarter logo, it's like, okay, they probably picked the font here. It doesn't look custom, I don't think, but they just removed the counter shapes, and okay, it's enough to kick off a new business, has a little bit of a voice to it. But is the point of view really there? And is it a little bit more defaulty, or is it a little of a trick? Well, recently it's been evolved to where I think it does have a stronger point of view. I think it's clear. I think it shows stronger decision making, stronger awareness of type, stronger vision in type. There's a clearer idea in it. This is made from circles. So anyway, I think it has advanced, and I think the advancement is a good one. Like, they could have overhauled it and redone it, but I think they stuck with certain aspects of the previous one and hung on to that, but now added what was missing. We're also seeing people reflect on decisions they made, right? Like NASA, quit using the worm, as they call this, a long time ago, but they've recently brought it back. I think as a reaction to just what they see in the world and what's happening in the world, and also maybe they woke up and saw how important type was. And if you see that, you're just like, wow, that's super cool. Why would they ever ditch this? And if you think about how, like what's the idea in there, Mike? And it's so simple, it's so minimal. I don't see much. Well, look at the flag in the back. Take one of those stripes, and you've got the NASA logo, right? So I think it's like taking the United States stripe, and playing with it and creating a simple, pure form, which is quite elegant and engineering at the same time, which is what they do. So I think it's the right decision. And here's something that I find interesting too. Like, a lot of companies have great history, and sometimes they, like Burger King, kind of look back and dug up something from the 60s. We see Pepsi do it periodically. They'll kind of look back at a particular logo from their history, bring it back, redraw it a little bit, get a type designer to do it. But I think, again, understanding type, knowing trends, knowing your content, your context, what you're trying to say as a brand, and then knowing how to use type to help you do that, is what we really need to focus on. Because now, as I've mentioned, it's critical to what brands need. and this, I put this one in here because it's a great example of, like I said, the designers being weak in certain things and forgetting what they may have learned in school. Well, they need to go back to the scale lessons, because their scale of made with real sugar is like the same scale as the brand. And I think it's a very strange combination of these two equally weighted things put together. And it's, so this is on their website right now. Like this is the can that they somehow have some sense of pride in. And I think it's shameful that it exists. I threw in a couple of logotypes that I've worked on to kind of also show that it's been part of what I've tried to do is, every logotype that I work on, it's really, I think long and hard about the decision-making frameworks. I try to learn as much about the brand, of course. And then of course, these have been done during kind of brand strategy and kind of rebranding exercises. So we're trying to get crispy about what this brand is trying to say, or what its point of view is. And so, it forces you to move through different styles maybe, but I still have a point of view about design, about type and design. And I apply that same point of view across all of them. They look different, but my point of view is there in them all. And I'm constantly learning from these experiences each time myself. So as you've heard from me today, it's a lot of yapping on type, which I hope I've shown you how important it is, and you can see why brands just are completely dependent upon, I think, typography, type, and now more and more designers to do that better for them and push on it more and show up in more places than ever. So yeah, I mean, I say type needs a new PR campaign. Well, that would be you guys, I think, the educators starting, and like the Hoffmitz Milken Center for Typography. Like, what can we do to be the best promoters, educators, and build the most cohesive campaign around, letting people know, designers included, and the users on the other side, how important typography is. It is how mankind has progressed through our entire existence, has been with type, and we just don't talk about it. Like, where are the exhibitions on type? Like you see stuff on Matisse and Pablo Picasso all over the world, but where's an exhibition dedicated to typography and see it repetitively, because it's that important. And I don't even see one exhibition on typography really show up at the scale that it needs to be, and from a important the institutions like MoMA or other world-class museums. They just don't do it. And so why is that, I wonder? So with that said, I'll end my yapping and open it up, and any questions, I'd love to keep chatting.
Thank you. What a beautiful presentation. It really was. It was just a fabulous, fabulous presentation. I think it's a discussion that we'll have to, we discuss type all the time. We're typaholics, we're, type nerds. I mean, typographers have the discussion, but it's a question of how do we have other people start having the discussion when they say that, why should they be discussing Nike versus Adidas or Adidas versus, they should be out there arguing with each other. Cheltenham versus Clarendon, the normal person on the street should be arguing, favorite types. So I have a question, very complex world today about typography, and then other people have questions we'll get to. How would you change or add to the formal education of typography that you had today? What needs to be added to it in order to satisfy Mike Abbink when a designer comes to you and says, I can design for you? What needs to be added to curriculums?
I mean, that's a great question. I think there's an important distinction, because the ones that are getting a great type education, right? That exists. They come out and go in the world. But I think the point I was trying to make is that not everyone making design is coming out of these great, programs, right? I have so many UX designers telling me, they show me work, and as a preface, they say, "Oh, Mike, I'm just a UX designer, but I need some advice. I'm working on this thing. I want you to look at it." And then I'll look at it, and it's like 25 screens. It's the product. They're not just like tinkering around. They're designing what is the product. And it's a UX designer, and they don't have the skills, right? So I guess to answer that question is, it's maybe less about the graphic design department trying to solve the problem, which, I mean, I can go into that too, but I think it's all the disciplines that spit out kids that go and work in design. So if it's a UX kid or a UI kid or a motion kid, well, you better well know typography, because when you land a job somewhere, you will be working with type. And if you're not skilled enough, you will be doing bad type. You will be implementing it not as good as you should. And so I guess the question is,
So you need,
we all have to take math, right? In college, we come to college as a freshman, we take math, we take English, we take, biology. Why not history of type? Why not basic type? We did it when we were young. We learned how to write, but we're not writing anymore, guys. We're like implementing typography in almost everything we touch, see, and like think about and bump into is type, and so to really lay down the importance and of the role that typography plays in humanity, like humanity is it. So why is type just something like, oh yeah, it's communication, can get that in design school? No. It's there with math and science in my book. So like, it doesn't answer your question really, but.
Well, it does, because I think there's a certain pervasiveness that, if you're going to deal with language, and I agree, if you're a transportation designer, if you're a UX designer, the minute you touch a letter form, you should know how to use that letter form like you would use any other form in your craft. And I think it's, I agree with you, it's sort of like glossed over in other design disciplines. Do you think though that, okay, if institutions can't supply it, or you find that you get these designers that are lacking, would it help, and this is an interesting question, would it help then if there were programs you can go to your designer and say, look, you need a lot of help, and I'm not here to really give you that help. Would it help if there were programs set up specifically for businesses to
Absolutely.
say, you need to go and take this intensive strictly geared towards you as a UX designer, or you as a transportation designer, and really focus in on that, I mean, that's something institutions, and I have to say that's something the HMCT, and other institutions can do. There's the programs that we have, right? The degree programs, but then there's and I mean good quality typography refreshers, not that, I think it has to be at the same level that you might get as an undergraduate. It can't be fluff. It can't be, give me your money and I'm going to give you this little thing.
Yeah, no, and I agree. I was thinking about something similar, because I think it can have ranges, right? Because some folks could just go get a crash history course. Look at what type has done over the course of history, and the importance and value and the impact it has on our culture, our world, what we do, how we grow, how we progress. That might be enough for someone to go, holy shit, yeah, I need to really now think about type. I'd learned so much in this class. Every time I look at any work that I do on a day-to-day basis, I have now completely transformed how I will assess and look. And maybe now they're so into it that they want to take the next course, which is learn the basic skills, or what are the typography musts? An N dash and an M dash and a hyphen and dumb quotes are musts. Everyone needs to know that. everyone.
It does drive us, doesn't it? It drives me crazy too. When I
go
see CNN
insane.
and MSNBC and they have their banner running across, or they put up a quote and it's a dumb quote, I want to just go over to the television and like throw it out the window. I think you're right. I think, part of it is, as much as you can to support, number one, we really believe in supporting educators at HMCT. That's why we do this, by the way. We also offer Mike a book it's a downloadable PDF with hyperlinks that Leah, based on Leah's history of letter forms and typography class. And people can go to the HMCT website, for instance, and it's a history book. It's simple. It doesn't encompass all history. But like you said, if you wanted your, basic employees to understand, how did we get here? So the more resources that people can find, I think the better, to start them on their paths. But again, so a few other questions people are asking. It's interesting about UX designers taking on layouts as an issue. It's in the Q&A, since it's not the areas of focus. So how do you find designers getting into programming when there are computer scientists and professional coders? I know the answer to this too. How much should designers add programming to their arsenal?
I think as much as you possibly can take on, because from what I see, most of the best designs when it comes to interactive stuff, right? Every time I'm wowed by it, it's from the designer who can actually dabble in code or who can animate, right? Because if the designer, and it's not always the case, so I don't want to mislead it, but it's very often that way. The other side of that is, on occasion, there is a developer or a technologist they love to kind of move in that direction, because I think they like to separate. I'm very productive with my development skills and I make things, or I'm using my development and engineering skills to actually explore and push. And those are typically called technologists, and those guys do amazing work too. And those folks I kind of see them as designers. They may not have had type classes or whatever, but they are very creative. They're strong thinkers. They know how to push technologies, and a lot of them have friends like someone who's an awesome graphic designer, and they'll bring in their friend, like, what's his name, Zach. You can follow him on Instagram, Zach Lieberman, I think his name is Zach Lieberman. He does tons of little explorations, and so I think it's a lot of it is seeking out your compadres. So if find a technologist. If you can't animate or do stuff yourself, befriend one somewhere in the program or out in the world. If you're graduating soon and you're going to go out, lock yourself to the folks and the capabilities that you don't have. Become mates with them, and so that you become a little duo, right, or a trio of people. Then you go make stuff together. And I find that I've seen that happen, and again, that leads to successful stuff. It's like, but it just doesn't happen enough. It's not with as much of the stuff being made, like I showed today. Like, there's just a flood of things being made, and the folks that do that really well is a minority. Yeah, how do we catch up? How do we sync with the demand and the making of, right? The production and making of, and the demand of all this stuff. How do we just have increased the amount of quality and of the craft and the discipline when it comes to typography across all that? Because I think we see technology moving fast, and we see that design is happening, right? But what we're missing is, if you look at design, there's a certain discipline called typography that's somehow it's not staying with the same kinds of momentum of technology moving forward, platforms growing and being born every day, and which present design. And so design as a whole is growing and happening like wildfire, and everyone's talking design, and we all have seats at the table now. And there's executive design guys like me. I'm an executive. but I'm just a little old graphic designer. How that happened, I don't know. But like, we'll have seats at the table, so it's on me, and I've made it my mission to be one of the people that I'm bitching about, right? Like trying to do something about this. But
Right.
that's the problem to me. Somehow the speed is not synced up of.
Right. I agree. So I have one more question, and this is from someone who wants to know, and I know you've explained it in another talk you've given. It's interesting that IBM decided to make Plex available for free, and I think that's been a great gift to technology and to typographers and to designers. And yet, it's interesting. IBM is not afraid of diluting their brand because they're offering the Plex for free. It was an interesting decision, Mike.
Yeah, there's a couple things around that. Well, one is we had made the previous decision to make our software and design system open source, right? So the Carbon design system is the IBM design system. We use it for our own work, but it's open source. Anyone can go pull all of our components that I showed on a couple of those screens and make products that look just like IBM products too. If you don't change them, right, you can change it. But if you just kept it as is, you would make a product that looks like it came from IBM. It just wouldn't have the logo on it. So if that's the case, right, that decision was made, and we believe that sharing our technology is the right thing to do. Well, then the typeface, as you saw, it's in everything. You can't have a UI. There's no such thing as a user interface really without type. You wouldn't know what to do clicking on colors alone. So the typeface had to be open source. So that was one forcing mechanism. The other is to the argument of, is it dilute the brand in any way? I would say absolutely not, because, and here's the example I give people. Helvetica, all right? Everywhere, like Arial's a system font. Most people can't tell it apart. You can get Helvetica easy, and look at all the business that are like Helvetica, like let's say American Airlines or like Crate and Barrel or whatever, right? Did those brands suffer because some other brand used Helvetica? Myriad was used by Apple for many years, and I was there. We went from Garamond and we went to Myriad, and we used it much smaller and more delicate, and we went to all the titanium stuff on black. But it was Myriad, a system font, and it's also the font that Adobe used. So did Apple suffer? In fact, Apple had its best like 10 years whilst using Myriad. And then actually I take that back. It did better once like the iPhone came on. But their comeback was during the time, right? They were about to fail, made some changes, Jobs came back. We made the new kind of visual expression with Myriad, and then Apple went nothing but up. And so that just crushes that story. So using Myriad is like whatever font everywhere,
Well, I think the voice really has to be appropriate for the type and the language and for the use. I mean, whether it's someone made a comment that, then type is not really that important to the brand. Of course it is. Of course, it's everything. It's the voice of the brand. So if Helvetica is good for multiple voices, that's fine. It's not going to be good for an Italian restaurant, to use Helvetica. I'm not going to eat Helvetica, that's for sure.
Exactly. I mean, but it could be. I mean, it depends on the Italian restaurant. But
That's
but to your point, the Plex reflects IBM. We've built all of the story behind Plex, the decisions. It's friggin' IBM. No other. It's born of IBM like thinking for sure, right? And when we use it and apply it to our world and communications, it is exuding IBM along with everything else. It's a package of stuff. It's like you wear a shirt, your jeans and your shoes and your socks all like work really well together. You look way cooler than if you just had a nice shirt and horrible looking pants.
right.
It's all.
I agree. I think Plex completed the ensemble for IBM. It really did. It really did. So we're going to have to end soon. And I think people are asking now, everyone wants to work with you. or for you, Mike, just to let you know. But I just,
I wish I could hire, believe me.
But I want to thank you, Mike. And we'll have you back again.
Yeah, I'd love to. And thanks for having me. And yeah, I think the day sounds great.
You've been terrific as always.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.